Welcome to another episode of Tech Life Stories. I'm joined today by Mark Boyer. Mark's got over 30 years of experience working in the technology sector, a dynamic and visionary IT leader driving transformation and organizational change. He's an expert in operating model implementation, influential people leader with exceptional presentation skills. He's currently working for a software house called The Workshop in the online gaming world and has worked in a variety of different industries, including the NHS, IT resellers, MSPs, telecoms. He's got a whole host of certifications in Microsoft Azure, AWS, ITIL, Prince 2. I think I've run out of things to say, Mark, but I've gone by your LinkedIn profile. Have I missed anything out there for you?
No, I don't think so. I was going to say that it almost sounds impressive, doesn't it? It's
It's a nice comprehensive list there for us to go through.
yeah,
And just so the listeners know, you are in sunny Malaga at the moment. You're not in the UK, is that right?
that is correct. Yeah, I'm out in Malaga where about probably 70% of my team is based, and then I have another big chunk of people out in Auckland, which is another fantastic place to visit, and
Wow.
then some in London. So I'm very fortunate to have those locations.
Okay. And look, we'll come back to those locations and a bit about the current employer in a bit. But obviously, I've given a bit of a rundown, but it'd be interesting for I suppose, the listeners and the viewers to kind of hear your kind of thoughts of your background and what got you into technology, and some of the decisions you made in taking some of the roles you took and why you took them. If you can give us a rundown.
Sure. I mean, my original background, I was a techie, predominantly around the Microsoft space and VMware and Citrix, that type of
Yeah.
environment, and always been interested in technology and playing around with things. So that was where I started, and then it was really, I guess, in the NHS where that was a very interesting space to learn because of the nature of the organization. You were given the option to get involved in a lot of different things. So at the time I was working in NHS, you weren't necessarily forced to specialize in any particular topic. So it was very useful to, you were able to touch and play with an awful lot of things.
Hmm.
And over time, I guess I became more interested in the way to do things as a bigger picture. So the ITIL piece was introduced to me in the NHS, and really I became also interested in people, because again, it's a very interesting place to work where technology is not necessarily at the forefront of what people do, and you have a very diverse mix of people with diverse skills and feelings towards technology.
Sure.
So how you handled people and introduced technology to people became critical to the success of what the team did. So over time, I became less of a techie, and I would absolutely say I am in no way technical today. That has long left me, and very much focused on leadership and really on how to get the organization working in the most efficient way and delivering the most value. I often say to the team, I see myself as the conductor of an orchestra, and it's like having 100 people who are a one-man band who play all the instruments together, and my job's to get them to play a cohesive song and tune that makes sense to everybody. So my technical days are long behind me.
I mean, look, you mentioned obviously you were a techie before, in that Microsoft, Citrix, VMware type space. How do you how's that transition happen? Because it can't happen overnight. You can't go from being a techie 1 minute to then being interested, or being, I suppose, a leader and leading people, and like you say, getting the best value out of the an organization, and being that leading that orchestra. So how does that kind of transition happen, and over kind of what time period as well?
I guess I followed a path that a lot of people follow that isn't always the right one. In that I became a senior technical person, and then by default I became a team leader.
Mm,
And what I've learned over time is often that is a very, very bad path to take,
yeah.
because something we do here. We have a clear definition between technical people and what we call the managerial path. People have to make a decision because often those are two unique skill sets where you excel at one or the other. There are some people who are very, very talented that can do both. But boy, I kind of moved into that path as a team leader, made lots of mistakes. Um, and sort of evolved from there. I guess the further I got, the more I enjoyed the influence and the ability to see things through to, rather than being a small cog in a big machine, the ability to influence things and bring things in with my team, I enjoyed more, and that kind of then led me down the path of the leadership path more than the technical path.
Yeah, no, I agree. I really like what you mentioned about the current organisation, the workshop where you work now, either being a techie or going down the managerial path. Because I think sometimes you're right. I think it's happens by default, that kind of transition into management, when sometimes maybe someone isn't ready for it, or they actually just want to be a techie. Sometimes not everyone's cut out for management, right? That it is a different role, and you do need a certain set of skill sets to do that role. Did you get any kind of coaching and training when you went into that type of role?
I did. I was again being in the NHS at the time. I was very fortunate there that we had a strong learning and development organisation, so I was able to do managerial training over a long period. And at the time, I have to say, I didn't. It's one of those things that felt a chore, but as I look back now, as I learned a lot, and I've made a lot of mistakes over time as well that you learn from. But I was very fortunate that journey started in the NHS, and I had that opportunity to train at the same time.
Okay, good. And you mentioned something there which I think is worth bringing up, because I think everyone talks about, and we're all good at this on LinkedIn, your successes and what you do well. But you mentioned the mistakes you made. Tell us about those.
Yeah. So the obvious one is, I've pushed people who have been my best techies into leadership roles, and
Hmm.
quite simply that's been the wrong thing to do, because what it's meant is not only have I put them in a role that they probably don't really want, but I've lost a serious amount of technical skill as
Mm.
well by asking them to focus on other things. So I've made mistakes like that. I guess the other thing I guess I've learned over time, and particularly in organisations where there's a lot of change, is not to do too much at once. Um, it was something I was reading recently, in that in order to pass a message down, one of the reasons I'm here this week is effectively bringing together all of my leaders for workshops and doing an all hands with my team, is about making sure that you don't give them too much information.
Hmm.
You know, the maximum key topics that I'm going to give them this week is three, because I want those to stick. I want them to resonate, and I want that to pass down. And in the past, I've just overloaded people with information. They don't know what to focus on. They don't know what's important. So I was reading something recently that it actually takes 10 times of repetition for actually messages to stick. And I often bore myself by saying the same things over and over again, but there is method in the madness, by
Yeah.
trying to make sure that I want to leave here this week where my team can articulate our vision and what we're
Hmm.
trying to achieve, and they understand it, and they're able to articulate that to their team, and the team can understand their role in that journey as well. So, I think the topic is less is more sometimes, and also giving people the space to make their own mistakes, and learn from those. I'm very keen not to. I can tell people where we're going and why we're going there, but how we get there, I very much leave up to them. So yeah, these are all harsh lessons that I've learned over time where I've got it wrong. Very much early on, got it wrong, and it's taken time to learn those.
Yeah, no, it's good. And on our pre kind of podcast call that we had, you mentioned less is more, and that stuck in my brain quite a bit. And I was quite excited to bring this up today on the podcast, because I think it's a really good concept. Because I think every organisation or manager has a different way of delivering messages or getting their teams to work, or the processes they work. But yours is less is more. So you mentioned a little bit there about, you know, getting that message across to your team and not giving them too much information. But how else is, how, you know, less is more? How else does that work in the organisation, or the way you deliver? You know, what else can you get out of that?
So being the software house, there's an awful lot of very clever technical people here. Very some we have some incredible talent in this business, and that means we also have lots of ways of working and frameworks that we have to follow. And something I'm really is we very much like every other business. We're going through an evolution of maturity. We get
Mhm.
better at things over time as we learn. And part of that is our ITIL journey and other frameworks we use. And one of the things that I'm really trying to get into my team is that if we're developing a process, for me, if that process needs to be documented and everybody that plays a part in that process has to read it, has to refer to that documentation, that process is not good enough. Yeah, the example I use is when I buy a new phone, I don't get a huge manual that tells me how to use it. It's intuitive.
Mhm.
It's second nature. I can follow the prompts and instincts that I have to use the technology, and that's how our technology should work. That's the experience that we should have for the people that we serve and our customers here. So trying to get that message over to people in that building processes are not dependent on people or documentation is crucial to our success. And we do a lot of that through using the tools that we have and the automation and trying to embed these processes in ways of working that feel natural, that feel, again, intuitive, that people will just follow the natural path because it feels the right thing to do.
Yeah. Okay. Isn't the way you've just described it, though? Isn't that kind of complete opposite to ITIL? ITIL is all about process documentation. You're saying it should be intuitive. It's the complete opposite, right?
Yeah.
But you are following an ITIL process where you are, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Everybody will tell you it's a framework. You take the bits that you need, and that's right. I have some healthy discussions with people here who are very tied to documentation. And my view is, if you write an operations manual, the reality is in my experience, in my career, there's been two people that read that: auditors that are coming to certify you, or your sales guys are taking it out to customers if you're selling managed services. But the reality is, if I look out, I can see my service desk in front of me. If I look out to the service desk, how many of those have read the operations manual?
Mm,
I can guarantee none of them, because that's not how they work. That's that if they pick up a ticket or a call, they haven't got time to be thumbing through a phone book size manual that tells them how to do something. So you have to find better ways. There are different methods of communicating and executing processes depending on who's involved at what point. And we also have to remember that everything we do, whatever we do here, our process is always a small piece in the middle of what's probably a much bigger business process as well.
yes. Yeah.
So
Very well.
it really does have to be lean, efficient, and quick.
Does I'm just thinking of, you mentioned you got a service desk there. So if a newbie coming into the team with relatively a small amount of experience, obviously in the old days, someone would have just given them a manual and said, right, read that and follow the process, etc. So what's the process now for that individual? Because I would have thought the training development side would be second to none to get them up to speed quite quickly.
Yeah, I mean, listen, don't get me wrong. We have SOPs, they are crucial. We have a knowledge base, we have those things available, but how
Mhm.
we use those, we try to be intuitive. So when somebody new joins, the focus is on actually spend time with people, understanding who does what and how we work and the culture, and then learn our tools. And through those two things, you'll be amazed how much through osmosis this sinks into people, how we work and with shadowing and the like. And I say we use our tools the best we can. So if they're logging a ticket, for instance, or working on a ticket, we have our knowledge base configured that it will automatically present to them the relevant knowledge that it thinks they would need, whether it's an SOP or a page that links them to a different department. We
Mhm.
try to use that to steer and guide them because, as you say, we could sit there and give them something to thumb through and read through, but you have to get your hands dirty to learn. So we try and do that in the best way we can.
And how much of getting hands dirty do you allow your service desk? Is there a certain like stage that they have to then pass over to a second line type of individual, or is your service desk doing both first and second? How does it work within the workshop at the moment?
Yeah, so we have I would say blurred lines, intentionally blurred lines. In the engineers and the service desks are all in the same room.
Hmm.
They all work together. We're very, I would say, everybody uses the word agile. I'll say we are very flexible, and we will adapt as the need takes us. So in reality, our service desk does predominantly first line, and then we have our engineers doing the second and third line, or our operations engineers moving on to an engineering team that is more focused on projects and the like. But those lines are not hugely definitive. We will flex and adapt depending on the workload and where that sits.
Yeah.
So, and a key part of that is also for development. We obviously have a very strong pathway in terms of what training people need, what qualifications they need to progress. But the best way to get that knowledge share is every day in, day out by these people being together, socializing together, working together.
Okay. Interesting point you just said there about being together, socializing together. How does that work in the modern world of people wanting hybrid working, and some people wanting to come into an office, some people don't? How do you find that right mix, and what do you operate for your team?
So as an organisation, we have 3 days in the office. It's a hybrid model, so 3 days in the office per week,
Mm-hmm.
and it works very well. So being out here this week, it's incredibly valuable time spent with people, and I see the benefits of people doing it. I think yeah, we see huge benefits in people spending that time together, and the culture here also supports that. People breakfast together, they lunch together. There is an incredibly strong culture here, and also in the Auckland team as well. So yeah, there is that. As I say, I think my favourite word is osmosis at the moment, because there is that natural spreading of knowledge through people spending that time together. And they also socialise together. One of the key things we're doing this week is a social activity to bring people together and get them to learn and understand more about each other as well. But we are very, very lucky in that the culture supports it here in Spain.
Yeah. Is that the same across London and Auckland as well?
Yeah, London is a bit different. London is London. It's certainly, for me, London has changed since lockdown. It hasn't quite picked up with the vibrant atmosphere that it once had. I think what I see. I live in London, in the centre of London. Um, you know, Thursday is the new Friday in
Yeah.
London. Everybody socialises on a Thursday and works at home on a Friday. So it hasn't quite captured the same feeling it certainly had before lockdown. But again, this organisation as well is very strong on that culture. So we have Thursday events on a weekly basis, lots and lots of other events where people share knowledge, geek talks and the likes, learning labs and the like. So we do an awful lot to encourage that socialisation as well.
And is that going out on a Thursday and working from home on a Friday something to do with hangovers?
Surprisingly, I don't think it is so
No.
much here.
Okay.
There isn't that culture. So yeah, no, I don't think that is that culture. In some of our Thursday events are actually, they're very good. I think we're just about to hit a sports theme for the next few weeks with the
Nice.
Euros coming up.
Oh,
So
good.
we have some, our workplace teams do some fantastic stuff.
Good, good. On a recent episode of one of the podcasts I've done, I was joined by a gentleman called Alan Nance, who's in the US, and mental well-being came up quite interestingly because we were talking a bit more about those that don't go into an office and how it affects their mental well-being. So the fact that, I love the fact obviously it's a hybrid model, and I think for those that aren't part of a hybrid model, that they are actually working from home 5 days a week. What kind of ideas would you have to kind of like help them like with their mental health and ensuring that they're not just tied to their desk all day long? Any ideas from that point of view?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because my role previous to this was fully remote. And I did that for a number of years. And actually, one of my key motivations for changing role was about getting back into an office
Yeah.
environment. It is difficult. It is, it's difficult to remain engaged. I just feel I'd almost felt like I'd lost my mojo.
Yeah.
Just not having that regular sort of office atmosphere was. I don't think I realised until I actually moved how much it was impacting me. And yeah, that was a huge motivator. But we used to try and counter that as best we could through, like quick daily stand-ups. We would do quizzes and things like that. But I'll be honest, they don't really hit the spot.
Mm.
I do think the social interaction, there is so much value to it. I mean, I might be a little bit out of touch with what I see on LinkedIn and about people can work anywhere and deliver, and I agree with that. With the benefits we saw was the commute time. The
Hmm.
work that people were producing when not commuting was invaluable, but the flip side to it is actually that commute at the end of the day was often the point at which they would unwind
Yeah.
and just release the pressure of the day, and people weren't getting that. So for me, the hybrid model really is the best of is the best of both worlds, and there's so much value to be got personally through spending time with people as well. So, I think it is very very difficult. I mean, we do some interesting stuff here as well with work from anywhere, so people are able to go and work from different countries and locations for a certain number of weeks in a year as well. So we try to mix it up as much as possible with people working remotely as well. But I think if you ask most people, they do enjoy coming into the office.
Yeah, I think. I mean, look, myself, I work from home. I've got a garden studio. I could be in here all day if I didn't make myself go out. So I ensure that I always have my lunchtime walk. I ensure now that I'm always at least once or twice a week meeting either a client or a candidate on a face-to-face basis, because most of my time is spent on video, right? But I miss that interaction with people, and I think some people think that they like the thought of working from home because they don't have to have the commute, etc. But actually, I think, like me, I miss that interaction. I need that interaction with people. I think it's critical for my mental health to have the interaction with people. So I think it's really important. And I think Alan Nance, what he was suggesting was that um, he goes to a cafe, or like an internet cafe where he doesn't have to pay for it. It's like an open kind of scheme where people can go and work basically. And just grab a
Mm.
coffee and it's free. But they have counsellors on site, and those
Okay.
and those counsellors actually provide mental health support to individuals where they don't have that interaction. I thought it was really cool. Haven't really come across that here so far in the UK. But yeah,
Yeah, it is an interesting. I found out recently near where I live in London. Actually, there is a working office where you can actually also take your children, which I find interesting.
yeah, that
So
is interesting.
there's a big playground and play area within this shared or co-working space where people can take their children, which is something I hadn't seen
Yeah.
previously, and I'm sure that works for a lot of people.
It's got to. I think we're in this world now where co-working, hybrid, etc. I think offices or organisations, they need to cater for everyone and anyone, right? So allowing them to bring their kids into work, or have a playground or options for the children is a big tick for individuals with a family. It's like those that have got pets and I want to take their dog into work, for example. You see that a lot in co-working spaces. So I think organisations are adapting. I think we've still got a long way to go, but I do like the hybrid model because I think there's a best of both from that perspective. So I really like what you said there. I want to rewind a little bit because you mentioned obviously you were techie, you was Microsoft bod. Um, what got you into technology? What did you have that burning desire as a child to go into the tech world, or did you kind of fall across it?
Yeah, I think going all the way back to having my first home computer and playing around, loading the games on the tape, waiting, hoping that they'd load, and all of that fun with the Commodores and the like. So I always had an interest in sort of technology, and it really sort of led on from there. And I guess so. I'm really I always like to look back, and it fascinates me how technology has influenced the way the world changes and the way that people behave and change. And obviously at the moment, it's never been at such a fast pace. Things are, with AI and all of these things, the pace of change is incredible.
Yeah.
So I just find it really, really interesting, to see the impact it has on people.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, look, I remember Commodore 64s and loading up the tape, etc. And
Yeah,
now kids have got it too good. A game is instant for them. They don't know what it's like. They don't know what
yeah.
dial-up internet was like. So it's on tap for them. Do you think technology can still fast forward like the extent it's been over the last 10, 15, 20 years to the next 10, 15, 20 years? Or do you think we're going to go for a little bit of a stabilization stage? Taking out AI, obviously AI is the big thing at the moment, but where do you think it's going to be in the next kind of like 10 years plus?
I think it's interesting is in terms of, can businesses keep up with the speed of change? I think we're obviously in a world, I think, where startups can thrive
Hmm.
because they have all the options available to them in terms of what technology they embrace. It's very much more difficult for large organizations. Some of the larger organizations I've worked with, changing some tools we've used there has taken years. So I think, and going back to ITIL, I think it's very interesting at the minute in terms of, can ITIL keep pace
Mm.
with technology? And it's also very interesting what I find. I have two grown up children, but where they've grown up with technology is very interesting in terms of the demographic of people as well. I think I'm very interested in seeing what younger people bring into the world of ITIL, for instance. They've not known anything but technology growing up, so their approach to it is very, very different. And I think that's something that we try to tap into here, bringing in the younger people who have that different view on the world. It certainly, it challenges my thinking and the way that I work sometimes as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think in previous podcasts, again, we've had the conversation of, is the kind of service management ITIL world appealing to the younger generation? Are we attracting them in to give, like you said, to challenge you, to give you different way of thinking? What do you think about that? Or, have you struggled at all, or has it been fine for you in the workshop or previous organisations you've been at before?
I think what I found interesting doing a lot of work in my last two roles on a more global basis is the difference of perception with service management in Europe in particular and in the UK. It is very, very different, and certainly recruiting in Europe, you have to recruit in a different way because it's not as common. People are perhaps doing the role without even realizing it's service management.
Okay.
So I do think it needs to adapt. I think it needs to, part of my vision and my view about less is more is because I think it's seen as a constraint
Mm,
uh, often, and it's an obstacle. And particularly here, we are driven by high velocity IT. We need to churn work out at a high pace, an iterative pace, and service management, the way the ITIL and processes are applied, doesn't always contribute to that. So I do think it is going to change, and I think actually some of the tools that come in, I think everybody recognises at the moment, ServiceNow is probably the market leader. I think that will
yeah.
be challenged and changed because I think it's probably grown to a space where it needs its own cottage industry just to run your service management tools. That becomes an obstacle. So we really do try and keep things as lean as we can here. So we're an enabler rather than a blocker.
So it's quite interesting you saying there. Obviously, recruiting in Europe's different. People might not know that the role they're doing is a service management role. Like, what is the actual difference? Like, how does that come about? Does that come about from them applying for the job, or does it come about? I'm just trying to get my head around why it's different in Europe compared to the UK, particularly.
So I think one of the big differences is, in the UK we have quite specific roles, it's like service transition managers,
Mm.
service improvement managers. We really break it down to that detail. Whereas actually in Europe, nearly everybody's a service manager or a
Okay.
service delivery manager. All of these tasks fall to the same role type. So
Hmm.
you really do need to dig into somebody's background and what they're actually doing on a day-to-day basis to then work out exactly what skills they have. Because obviously, there are 34 practices within ITIL 4. Not everybody, very few people have expertise or experience in all of those practices. So when you're looking for a service transition manager, you're literally filtering through endless number of service managers because simply the service transition manager role doesn't exist in that title out in Europe. So yeah, it's really quite a different challenge to find the skills that you need. They exist, they absolutely exist, but
Hmm.
they're often masked by the titles that people have and the roles that they play in their entirety.
It's quite interesting because obviously you're working at a global organisation. So are you still having those issues even as part of a global organisation, having been masked by those service managers not being a service transition manager, for example, that the UK title has? Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah, I think we've learned through some of the recruiting I did here in my early days, and I think it was one of those things again where I was working for a large German organisation before I came here,
mhm,
but I think the penny hadn't dropped. You kind of get you can't see the wood for the trees, as I say, when you're in amongst it. But when I came here and we were doing the recruiting, I think we learned to adapt in terms of how we were looking into the market to find people. And there's actually a huge amount of talent, particularly we've done quite a bit of recruiting in Eastern Europe
mhm.
because obviously there are lots and lots of large organisations that have outsourced. And we're very fortunate here in Malaga. We're actually here where I am today. We're on one of the biggest tech parks in Europe, so there's lots of good technical skills and capabilities here. It was just finding them and actually describing what we wanted in a way that resonated to people, so they applied for the roles, and that took a bit of work for us.
Okay, okay. So going back to my question, do we think it's still appealing? By the sounds of it, if you're still finding them, you're attracting them, then yes, it is still appealing. Would you say?
Yeah, I think we sell service management well, and I think the way we sell it is the opportunity to learn more about the business. We are business facing. So we're very focused on using service management to ensure we deliver value to the business. So we move from being effectively a support function to a core contributor to what the business does.
Mm,
That's how we're selling it, and we use service management as an enabler.
okay.
So yeah, and that I think that does excite people. We've seen some good internal recruits want to move into a space. Going back a couple of years ago, there was no service management capability in this organisation, and now it's a well established function.
Good, good. Okay, all right. And something you mentioned, obviously recruiting globally, Eastern Europe, Malaga. Obviously, you mentioned the other offices you've got in Auckland and London. I'm just picking the current role at the moment because it's the one we're talking about. But how do you ensure culture remains the same, or the same kind of working culture across all those different locations? Like, how do you keep that consistency between those like offices?
I think the first thing you have to do is recognise they're different.
Hmm.
Yeah, and actually, you can't necessarily have entirely the same culture across them all. We're working across time zones. I think you have to recognise again what workloads you have coming in and what the balance of those workloads. And what I mean by that is within European hours, that's where we get the core of our reactive work, our incidents and events. So therefore, that's the priority for the European based teams. Whereas what that means is then we can prioritize more project based work in the other time zones, such as in Auckland, for example. So what we do is actually recognize and embrace the difference in the cultures that we have, and try to utilize those rather than try and have a common culture across all. The business does a fantastic job in terms of the way that we run events here, as I say, with the training and the core people services that we apply across the business is very, very consistent and very, very good. So that helps with that underlying structure. But we absolutely embrace the different strengths that the cultures bring to us. I mean, although I say we're here in Spain, I think at the last count we have over 40 different nationalities in the business. So it's a
Wow.
very, very diverse culture. And something again that I found interesting recently is there is some I can't remember. I'll quote this, and I'm not sure where I got it from, but I read that for every 25 people you bring into the business, your culture actually changes.
Yeah.
It's not what you think it is. So you have to actively work on the core foundations of maintaining the culture, and that's we're very fortunate here, as I say, with our people services and learning development and the workplace teams that provide that underlying culture through the events that they run and the processes that they have for bringing people on. So, but we do also recognise the value that having these different cultures and these changes that come over a period of time as well.
But it must be challenging for you as a leader. Every 25, nationalities that come in potentially, and the culture changes. You're used to one set of culture. It's changing over time. Do you just embrace that? Would you say, or do you try and like say, hold on a minute, let's try and keep a little bit of what we've had in the past?
I try to, but I think I also have to learn. There are. Yeah, I think one of the mistakes I made early on was not recognizing that there are needs to communicate in different ways, often depending on culture.
Hmm.
Where in the previous, where I've had teams in Asia, teams in Eastern Europe, and various places, how I communicate to them needs to be very different, and often actually how they communicate with each other. You know, I repeated a mistake here. If I send an email out to my entire team, I have to recognise that is going to 20 plus different cultures. So I
Yeah.
have to be very careful about how I word it. If it's too short, too sharp, it could be interpreted in a very different way by different people. So you have to, you kind of have to find the right tone to communicate with people, which can be a challenge, and
Hmm.
and you don't always get it right. Sometimes you just don't.
And do you stick by that though? Just sending one email? Or would you try and send two or three different types of emails depending on the office? Like one for London, for example, one for Malaga, one for Auckland. Like what's worked for you so far?
So there are some instances where I will send two emails, where I will send one to Malaga and I will
Hmm.
send one to Auckland that are different because I've recognised that sometimes they're interpreted differently. But I have a practice where I always send a weekly update to the whole team on our chat channels on a Friday, and I only send one there, and I do tend to I try to make it more. I think people have learned about me as well, so I try and make it more conversational, try and pick out the highlights of the week, and sort of set the tone for what we've got coming up in the following week. So I think that has helped. In reverse, people understand how I communicate as well. So
Yeah.
it reduces that misinterpretation that can occur.
I really like what you said there about people have learned about me. So would you sum you up then? Your the way you manage, the way you communicate. What would you? How would you sum that up?
Um, it's interesting because I think sometimes your self perception is not entirely how other people see you.
Yeah.
And it's I think what I get here is I'm seen as over optimistic sometimes, which I find really interesting because it's not how I see myself. But I am passionate in what I do, and I do get excited about ideas. Our big topic at the moment is continual improvement, and what we're doing in that space is I find exciting. So I will. I'm very visual, so I do a lot of diagrams and drawings and show people kind of visually what I like us, the path I'd like us to take, and I hope it's not preachy. My fear is sometimes I can get overexcited by things, and I start to preach. But ultimately, I try to give people the space to make their own decisions. I don't tell them how we do things. I tell them where we want to go.
Hmm.
It's up to them how we get there. And, I can sometimes nudge them back in the right direction. But, something, many people say, if I'm the smartest person in the room, I am in the wrong room. I
Correct.
really shouldn't be there.
Yeah, I agree with that. And maybe that goes a little bit back to what you were saying previously about less is more, right? Like just give them the right amount of info at the right time. But yeah, it's quite interesting because, like you say, when you're self-analyzing yourself, sometimes what you think you are is a very different
Mm.
perception to what other people have in you. Something you mentioned, and we will come back to what you mentioned there about continual improvement, but just going back, because in my previous podcast, I had a lady called Gemma Levin on, and she spoke about having coaches throughout her career, which have really helped her. Have you ever had coaches maybe to kind of help you along the journey, or had like an inspirational person that you always go back to for advice and guidance? Because, like you say, sometimes you will self-analyze yourself, and you just need that sounding board of someone else to tell you whether you're thinking along the right lines or not.
Yeah, I think I'm a huge believer in you can learn something from everybody,
Hmm.
and I always try to take something from everybody in the team that I meet, and it might just be a simple thing like how they deal with a particular situation, how they communicate with their colleague. I'm always very very interested in observing and watching people. So I'm constantly looking to see, okay, I like the way they do that. How can I incorporate that in what I do? There are probably two or three key people in my career that I've learned an awful lot from, and taken on some of their ideas. Again, I'm very, very fortunate. We have some incredibly talented people here that I've learned from as well, and I hope that I've helped them learn as well. So I think there's a constant theme of continuing to learn all the way through. And yeah, there are definitely two or three people in my career that I've learned huge amounts from. And not only what good looks like, but I've also learned from people that have got things wrong. I've
Yeah.
seen people do things very, very wrong, and and probably, if I hadn't been there, I'd have made the same mistakes.
No,
So
definitely.
yeah.
I've always said this throughout my career. I prefer it when people give me constructive criticism, because it's all well having a pat on the back saying you've done this well, you've done that well, but actually you're never really gonna know what's wrong or where to improve unless someone tells you where you're going wrong. So I've always found that's worked really well for me, and I've never really been one to take praise. That's not my style. I'm like, actually, when I used to have my like appraisals or personal development reviews, manager would always big me up, etc. You've done this way, you've done it. I said, like, but what can I do better? What areas can I do more? Um, would you say some of those two or three individuals that have been inspirational in your career that have helped you? Do they give you that kind of constructive criticism that you need? Would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that what I also benefited from is they pushed me out of my comfort zone.
Yeah,
So, pushed me into situations I was probably thinking, oh, I can't do this, or and I think that's something I've tried to replicate as well. I think you can often see talent in people that they don't see in themselves, and they just need a little push in the right direction. I won't name names. I have one relatively new manager in my team who I think is incredibly talented, and she's doing a lot of things very, very, very well without even realizing that she's such a talented leader. We're still going. We often have conversations where she says, "Oh, I've done this. I'm not sure if it's the right thing." And actually, she's just a natural leader, and just continuing. She's going to present at one of our sessions this week, which is far outside her comfort zone. But I know she's going to do a fantastic job.
yeah.
So I think being pushed as well. Having that constructive feedback, but also just being pushed that little bit further than you're comfortable with, I think is very important as
Yeah,
well.
definitely. I agree with you there. And then let's rewind a little bit. You mentioned continual improvement. Let's talk about that a little bit. Like, what do you mean by that, and what's involved?
So the driver for us is actually continual improvement. I think happens all of the time. but
Hmm.
it's not always visible. And the challenge that it's causing me at the moment is it's actually generating a hidden workload. So we have there are three types of work, and I think this applies to everybody. There's a reactive work that manifests itself through tickets via the service desk for us.
Hmm.
There is long-term planned and project work that we do, and then in the middle there's the operational work, the recurring tasks, whether that be reporting, operations, maintenance for our systems and our tools. But all work falls into those three buckets, and everybody is constantly looking to do things better. So the teams come up with ideas and pieces of work to improve how we deliver. But if we don't have a framework in place, that becomes invisible. And the only way we know it's happening is when either tickets are not being delivered on time or projects are slipping. And when we look into it, well, why is that? Well, it's actually because we're doing some very noble and good work, but it's not following a framework. And the other aspect that I'm very keen to reinforce is if you don't define the continual improvements that you do, and by that I mean there are two types. There are fixing things that you've got wrong, but there's also innovation and
Hmm.
adding value. And if
Yeah.
you don't define the difference between them, everybody assumes you're fixing something and you've got something wrong. Everybody assumes that an improvement is to fix something that you've not done well in the first place.
Hmm.
So we're building a framework again focused on embedding this into the way that the teams work organically, to record the work they do, so we make sure we've got full visibility of it, but also to put in some automated scoring around it so we can prioritize that work as well. So we can make sure that we're utilizing our teams to the best of their ability and their capabilities without impacting some of the other work that we know we've got on. So it's just bringing that hidden workload to the surface.
And then I'm trying to think here, like with the continual improvement, do you set the kind of like the boundaries, the goals, the targets for that, or do you include the team to do that as well?
So it's through the scoring mechanism we're using, we're able to put a score amongst it, which then enables the right level of authority to make those decisions.
Okay.
So particularly, if we have an improvement that is relatively, a few hours work with very few resources needed, the team can decide when they do that,
Hmm.
because the score of that will mean it sits at that level. The bigger pieces of work, or those that perhaps add wider value across a wider area, they will naturally float up through the scoring mechanism up to the leadership teams and the directors to be able to make decisions about how do we prioritize that, because ultimately we can't do everything.
Yeah.
So it does mean that we have to make decisions, and what it also does, it also enables us to make sure we've got the right size teams and the right skills in the team as well. And without having that visibility of the workload, that makes it very difficult to be able to do that.
And you mentioned it's automated. In what sense?
So basically, the way the teams will work is everybody manages their work in the same way. So if it's an incident, we've obviously have a ticketing system. Projects, we have a mechanism for all of our projects and programs, and then we have a similar sort of middle ground for all of our planned and recurring work. So what we do is we've adapted our ticketing system to enable people to log tickets at continual improvements. Same with risk and issue, because it's a very similar framework. And as they do that, they literally, it's almost like they're logging an idea. They're
Mm.
recording an idea. And then what that does is that pulls automatically into a single dashboard view based on the scoring mechanism we put against it. And depending on who you are in the business, you will see those levels of improvements, ideas that are relevant to you, that the people that need to make the decisions will have visibility of it. So we're able to quieten some of the noise, because there's lots and lots of work, lots of ideas people have. We can make sure that, my boss is only seeing the ones where I need his impact, for instance, and where teams are able to take the autonomy and make decisions for themselves. We enable that through the scoring mechanism as well.
Okay. All right. That's really good. Really interesting, by the way. I find it quite fascinating. I want to see, because obviously we spoke a lot about the current employer. In some of your previous roles, where you've been involved with like driving transformation and kind of like organizational change, has the impact been as what you've done now, or even bigger previously? Tell me about some of your previous stuff that you've done.
I think the common theme in most of it has always been to see the service management function as an enabler.
Hmm.
I always think that what you can do if you build your service management function in the right way, it can be a catalyst for change in other areas. And for me, it is about removing some of the workload from the other teams to enable them to focus on what they enjoy and what they're good at. So that's always been the premise of building and changing the organisations that I've been in, and it's always been using service management as that enabler, as building the teams that can go in and they start by adding value to the teams, getting people to buy into why we're doing and what we're doing. And then if you do well and you start delivering what works well, it will then often spread outside of the IT department, outside of the technology organization, into the rest of the business, because a lot of the stuff and the processes and the ways of working that you implement apply across the board. They can be replicated in many, many areas.
Yeah.
Yeah, the example being continuous improvement and risk and issue management as well.
Yeah. Okay. And when you talk about risk and issue management, can you just elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, and that really that's about risks and issues apply everywhere. We need visibility of them. The danger is people will talk about risks and problems and those challenges, but if you don't record them, they kind of get forgotten until they become an issue, and
Yeah.
then you're in trouble. We've done a very similar thing again with risk and issue in automating it to ensure that most important ones float to the top, that people see them and need to see them. But equally, if we have a risk, then we may accept risks. Often, sometimes the right thing to do is say, yeah, we accept a risk. We don't accept that risk forever. That then has to start an automated cycle where in 30 days time we review that risk. Do we still accept it? Because the world changes. Technology moves so quickly. Sometimes that
Does.
risk is no longer a risk. So we're putting that in place. And again, that also drives that hidden workload challenge that we have, because people will react to risks and issues and create tasks off the back of them. And we need to see visibility of that.
Okay, good, good. I mean, look, we're coming towards the end of the podcast now. Couple of more kind of areas I just want to touch on before we finish. One is AI. We've got all this. We've spoken for nearly 50 odd minutes, and we haven't touched AI. But what's your thoughts on AI and the impact that it can have on organisations, and and the current organisation, and if they're enabling AI currently?
Yeah, I think it's interesting and scary at the same time. Uh, I obviously seeing the pace it evolves is fantastic and fascinating. And I do, I wrote an article on LinkedIn some time ago, and I was thinking, if you've got a service desk where you've documented everything and you've got SOPs for everything, my question would be, why do you need a service desk now?
Hmm.
Why can't you do that with AI and chat and the like? So, I do think that's probably where we'll start to see it seeping in. Obviously, from a documentation perspective, particularly it's interesting, particularly in industries or organizations where there are so many different cultures, where English is the business language. Clearly, people are leaning on that to help them with their written English as
Yeah,
well. So, and it's quite easy to spot at the moment, bullet points everywhere.
yeah.
What's been written by Chat GPT. But yeah, I still think I think it lacks control, and
Yeah,
that's the worrying piece. I don't know. I don't quite know. I think we're going to go through. It's that the Gartner hype curve. I feel like we're at the top of the hype at the moment, and it's kind of got to find its place in the world where it's safe and beneficial. And I'm not
mm.
sure we're there.
And has the current organisation enabled it?
No, we're not using it. If I'm honest, because I, where's the learning models? Where's all that data going?
Mm.
I don't. We're simply just not comfortable with putting all that data out there.
Yeah,
It just simply is. Yeah. So at the moment, it's not something we're embracing. I'm sure over time we'll find that place for it, but certainly not the mass market models that are out there at the moment. That's
yeah.
not for us.
I kind of agree with you a little bit. I still think we're in an area of uncertainty with it. And it's quite a scary place to go. And I think most organisations are being a little bit. I think they're waiting to pan it out a little bit just to see where it kind of eventually
Mm.
sits, because like you say, we're right at the top of the curve. It is the core main subject that everyone is kind of talking about at the moment. So it'd be interesting to see over the next 12 to 18 months, how far that kind of comes, and how organisations do enable it within their business. So watch this space, I suppose.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
Challenges, like any core kind of challenges for you or the business, and how are you overcoming them?
Um, I said earlier, we are an organisation that is obviously driven by high velocity IT, and
Hmm.
we're a very very dynamic organisation that changes rapidly. One of the attractive things about this place is, for the size of the organisation, it still has that culture and feel of a small dynamic organisation that can change quickly. That making sure that we are able to adapt to that at pace, is a learning curve. But I think we're finding our feet with that. We're doing better at that, and recognizing that, we need, again, it comes back to less is more,
Yeah,
making sure that what we put in place is right for now, but is equally able to change and adapt as the business changes and adapts. So yeah, making sure that we're not constraining ourselves too much by going over the board with too many processes, too many constraints of customizing our tools and the like. So we try and stay as lean as we can so we can adapt with the business.
good, good. Okay, all right. And future of technology. We spoke about AI. Any other areas do you feel that are going to have an impact in the technology world over the next kind of like 5 to 10 years? Would you say?
I'm particularly interested with the sort of the mixed reality. I think VR is kind of, I can't see VR taking off. I think augmented reality is going to be the future. I think, sitting here in, one day with my glasses on and no laptop in front of me, but maybe just a keyboard, is the future. But I think that mixed reality is going to be the game changer. It needs a lot of miniaturization, to make it viable just yet, but I do think that will be a massive change. We've played around with that in the past. We playing with the Microsoft HoloLens. I think, going back some years, we were able to create a replica of our data center, for example, and with our support team being 50 miles from the data center, they could put the HoloLens on and actually look at the racks, get a visual representation of the racks in front of them, and talk to the smart hands in the data center. So I think, those type of solutions, and obviously in the medical world and other places like that, I think it's going to be an absolute game changer.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely, I agree with you there. I think it would be really good on the recruitment side as well, actually, because I think if you can give that to, whether you can get this far, but if you can get that to a candidate even before they go for an interview, see the offices, etc.
Yeah,
Yeah, I just think that that'd be a game changer.
yeah.
So yeah, I think you're right. I think it's a really big area for the future of augmented reality. Um, just on a personal side of things, you mentioned obviously you live in London. Tell me a bit more about you. If you've got family, friends, what you get up to in your spare time.
So yeah, I live in West London, very close to Lord's cricket ground.
Yeah,
So I do try and enjoy going to the cricket in the summer.
nice.
Uh, which is great. For my sins, I'm an Arsenal fan. We're getting closer. We're getting closer. Um, but but yeah, most of my spare time is I live with my partner Karen, who has a very interesting career. She's in the matchmaking industry,
Wow.
in
Okay.
and so helping the very rich and the very famous find their life partners, which is some very interesting stories that she comes across in that. So yeah, so it's a very different world to what I work in. So
It's not too dissimilar to my world and the recruiting world and matching people. Obviously, I can imagine.
yeah,
Yeah, but I
yeah.
can imagine if she's matching celebrities and high level individuals, they've got a long list of stuff that they want
Oh,
ticked up. Yeah,
yeah. Very very different things are important to them than they are to
yeah,
people like.
yeah, I can imagine. And going back to Arsenal, you are getting closer. I'm a Liverpool fan, so I know that feeling.
Oh, okay.
We've been challenging up there as well. So yes, we're also Rans as well at the moment, as we say, compared to Man City.
Yeah,
Um,
next year.
hopefully, fingers crossed for one of us at least. Um, But that's it. Thank you for coming on. You've been superb. I think the main takeaway for me is less is more. And that will definitely be the title of the podcast without a doubt. But anything else you want to bring up, Mark, before we say goodbye?
No, I've really enjoyed it, and thank you very much for your time. And I hope some of it's worthwhile.
100% without a doubt. Well, I appreciate your time, and I'll catch up with you soon. See you
Thanks a
later.
lot.
Bye.
Bye.